This is the CNC Router Tips Podcast, episode 45. Before you go out and make a major purchase for a CNC router table or anything, you should consider whether it's worth your while to do so. I spent months going over this, talking to my friends and advisors and seeing what they said, and they all came down on the same side of things on this, that it was a necessity. This is the CNC Router Tips Podcast, a show which answers one question from you, the listener, about CNC router tables, CNC software, hardware, web hosting, and business. I'll help you get started in your CNC hobby or business and help you cut through the confusion.
Today's episode is sponsored by themakersguide.com. The Maker's Guide. Useful tools for makers.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, bill-griggs, with the CNC Router Tips Podcast. I'm so glad you could tune in today. Many of you may have been watching some of the live broadcasts that I was doing on Facebook inside of our Facebook group regarding a new milling machine that I just got from Tormach. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, Tormach is a company from Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin area, and they have CNC milling machines in a variety of sizes and lathes and things like that. And they're not directly related to CNC routers, but they're, my cousin. And so I think some of the things that I have to say about their machine and my experience getting it might be of interest to some of you who may be considering going into doing a little metalworking in addition to what you already do with your CNC routers. One of the things to consider when you decide to purchase new machinery is what you're going to use it for. And one of the reasons that I looked into getting a CNC milling machine was so that I could make parts that I was already making using someone else's milling machine. And I just wanted to make those parts here at my home workshop. And, it was quite an experience for me. I've never gone on a limb before business-wise. I've always been a bootstrapper, and I've built everything as I go, paying cash and, controlling the amount of expenses I had. Well, just so you're aware, these milling machines are not a trivial purchase as far as that goes. It's about the equivalent of getting a low-end commercial-grade router table as far as costs go. Now, the model that I got is the largest one that Tormach makes, and it is called the PCNC, or personal CNC, 1100. Okay, and that model is a 1.5 horsepower motor, and it's a very massive machine for a home-based machine. It is not what you would call a knee mill, which is what a Bridgeport milling machine is, and that's probably the milling machine most of you are familiar with. A knee mill has a table that raises up and down instead of the Z-axis moving very far. In fact, on a Bridgeport, the spindle generally doesn't move down very much, if at all, when you're using it. The table moves instead. Well, in this case, the spindle and the entire head of this Tormach machine moves up and down, very similar to what we do on a router. But that's kind of where the difference begins, because most of our router tables are gantry router tables. In other words, the entire X and Z axis move back and forth over the table along the Y axis. So with these mills, the table moves instead, and the spindle stays stationary, except in the vertical axis, the Z axis. So it's kind of interesting and backwards to the way that we do things. Well, for instance, when you press the right button or the right arrow key on our milling machines, the x-axis tends to go to the right if we're looking at the front of the machine. And when you press the up arrow, the y-axis tends to move away from you. Well, with a milling machine, the opposite happens, in particular this kind of milling machine. So when I press the right arrow, the table moves in the opposite direction than what you would expect. So the table moves and the spindle stays stationary. But if you're thinking about which direction the bit is moving, the bit in relationship to the part, it would be cutting towards the right, even though the table's moving towards the left. And when I press the up arrow, the table actually comes towards me, which would mean that the bit was going away from me, which would be normal to expect. So anyway, it's just a little bit of trivia there as far as that goes. But, having to get used to a new system has been quite an interesting learning experience for me. So I look at what machine I got, and it is the PCNC 1100, and it's a fairly heavy machine. It weighed about 1,300 pounds. And so this is not something you are going to lift up onto the table by yourself or even with another guy. It's going to take an engine hoist or a forklift or something to put this sucker up on a stand, and that's exactly what we had to do. Now, I'll post a link in the show notes to a video to watch this machine arrive at our shop so you get an idea of the size and scope of this thing. But, we had 4 pallets worth of equipment arrive at the shop with this. One box contained the milling machine. Another box contained the stand. Another box contains the enclosure that wraps around this thing. And then there was a whole pallet full of just accessories, things like cutters and wrenches and vices and computers and monitors and all that sort of stuff. And it was really quite an extensive process. And we had to move fast because we had snow coming that day to get everything indoors and in and out of the way. So anyway, it took us a couple of days to get this thing assembled to the initial point where it was just on the stand and level and everything. It took us a day to get it up onto the stand and leveled, and then another day messing around with wiring and things like that. So it was just quite much longer of an experience than I thought it would be. So in addition to the basic mill, I got the Deluxe Stand, which includes a chip tray, which gives a place for all the chips to go. When you're cutting metal, chips flying everywhere, you need to contain that. And in addition to that, I got the full enclosure, which not only has the chip tray, but surrounds it with a door, a couple of doors, and windows on the side of it. So it looks like a miniature machining center. It's big box with Tormach stamped all over it. Anyway, I also got an automatic tool changer, which will allow me to do several machining operations without stopping in between each one. So I could drill a hole, tap a hole, milling away a pocket, or chamfer the outside of it, all without having to change a single thing. And if I needed to do operations on the opposite side of the part, I could take it out and flip it over and then run a few operations there. So, that was very cool. The other thing that I got with this was a power drawbar. And the power drawbar and the automatic tool changer kind of go hand in hand, because the power drawbar uses a giant pneumatic cylinder to push down on the top of the drawbar to release the spindle. And that allows the tool changer to come and pick it up, rotate it out of the way, and stick another one in there. And then the cylinder releases, and the bit is then mounted properly in the spindle and ready to go for the next operation. So I got that. I got the flood coolant to go with it. I got a bunch of different types of indicators to let me know where the parts actually were. Got the device and the computer and monitors and all sorts of things. Basically, Tormach makes packages available that have all the parts that you would want or need in one place, and so you can order one thing. Now, I messed around a little bit and changed up some of the things that I ordered, to suit my personal needs, because I already had some equipment. But, you could just go on their website and push one button and order the whole thing. This package that I ordered is called the Part Maker Package, and it's designed for folks who want to go right into manufacturing parts instead of just, like a hobby machine. And it included all the things that I've mentioned already. Now, this package is the top of their line, and it's about $23,000 to $24,000. Yeah, that's right, $23,000 or $24,000. That's as much as some of the cars that I own have cost. And I still get a little choked up every time I think about spending that on any form of equipment. But one of the reasons that I did it was because my business has grown to that point where I needed to take better control of how I produce my parts and how frequently and, when I have access to it. And this is one way for me to do that. So before you go out and make a major purchase for a CNC router table or anything, you should consider whether, it's worth your while to do so. And I spent months going over this, talking to my friends and advisors and seeing what they said. And they all came down on the same side of things on this, that it was a necessity at the point in my business to go ahead and do it. And so I took the plunge. But that brought up another question. How was I going to pay for it? Because I don't have $25,000 just sitting around to buy a machine. Now, I had revenues coming in fairly regularly that would allow me to finance a machine. And my choices were to either, go to a bank or a credit union and get a personal loan for this amount, or go and get a business loan, or the way that I decided to go, which was to lease the machine. Now, I never really thought about leasing a machine prior to, looking into this and how I was going to go about getting, this machine. But it turns out to be a pretty painless process, actually, that was fairly effective. It has some advantages, and I'm going to have somebody come on the show and talk about leasing it as an option in addition, because I don't think most of us are aware of it as an option. And, anything that you can do with the Tormach, you could do with a CNC router as far as financing. So if you're getting a substantial router, this might be a way to consider to finance it. So what were the advantages of leasing it? Well, a lower down payment, having the equipment as an expense as far as taxes go, also being able to take advantage of some of the same tax benefits that I would if I bought the machine. So I'm maintaining my capital. In other words, I'm not spending as much out of my pocket up front to get access to the machine, and I can work it to make it pay for itself. So that's one of the reasons that I was looking at this. So, I mentioned some tax advantages, and I'm not an accountant, and I don't play one on TV. I'm not a bookkeeper, but there are a couple of programs that are available that, can help you with your business taxes. Now, let's assume you're doing business as a regular business, a sole proprietor or a LLC, or, some form of business entity. One of the advantages of purchasing a machine or leasing it is the ability to use that machine And when you're using the machine in the production of a physical product, and the majority of the use of that machine is for producing a product for sale, more than 51% of that, then you may be entitled to take a tax exemption on the sales tax of buying that or leasing that machine. Now, in New York State, they have a form called the ST-120, the ST-120 form, and that is a tax exemption form. And if you meet those qualifications, you can fill it out and enter all your information and send it in with the purchase order for your machine to the person that you plan to buy it with. And you have up to 30 days to do that after the purchase, but it will exempt you from paying sales tax on the purchase of the machine. So in the case of a $20,000 purchase, that might be nearly $2,000 in sales tax. But you have to have legitimate belief, because they are going to check whether you are using that to manufacture parts for sale. So that's one advantage. And another advantage is on the federal level, the Section 179 of the U.S. tax code regarding your ability to deduct or depreciate 100% of a purchase for business machinery that you're going to use in your business. So, a milling machine or a CNC router generally fits that bill. So you'd be able to deduct 100% of that at your current tax rate. So, you're not going to get a $25,000 deduction. You're going to get maybe 30% of $25,000, but you can take it all at once versus depreciating your machine over several years. And you should talk with an accountant and a lawyer and your tax guys and all that before you take advantage of any of those, or, make plans depending on those to see if your use qualifies and if you qualify. But there are some advantages of doing things that way. So what does all this mean now that I have this machine? What are the plans? And, going forward, am I still going to concentrate on the CNC router table? And the answer is yes. Am I also going to be doing things with this CNC milling machine? And the answer is yes. And in both cases, I'm going to continue to make products like the Maker's Guide Triple Edge Finder, which is the primary reason why I bought this machine, was to make those. But there are other projects that I have in mind that I would like to get to, and this will allow me the chance to do that. So I'm really very, very excited about this purchase and about moving forward. Now, I've been, like I said, doing videos of the assembly and showing you guys what shortcuts, tips, and tricks I've had as I assemble it, what things have stumped me, which is even more valuable to you, and how we solved any problems they come up with. Now, I've got to say one thing about the Tormach machines as a whole. I'm very impressed with how rugged these machines are and how professionally put together they are. There have only been a couple of instances of needing to get another part or having something that didn't quite work the way it came from this massive order I got. But each one of those was handled professionally and quickly by the folks at Tormach. One of the things was a coolant hose adapter that had threads all the way up but no starting point. And I'm not really sure how that was done, but no matter what we could do, we couldn't get that to thread onto the end of the hose. So I let them know. They sent me another one, and now I've got it, and it's been installed on the machine. The other issue I ran into dealt with the monitor, and when I talked to them about the monitor and what was going on with my monitor, they had me send it back to them and get another one. Pretty simple. So, overall, I'm very, very happy. These these things happen when you ship freight cross country in a lot of cases, and this stuff is, it's been very good. I can't really complain or kick about it. I know when you're in the middle of a project, it can be frustrating when you run across something that's not going quite as planned, but really I've got no complaints. So yeah, I'd buy another one of these in a heartbeat, and I may sometime in the future if my business grows enough to support it. So that's what you can look forward to seeing, and I'm hoping that the ability to produce these products here at the home will free me up to also be in the shop more with the router, working on things on the router while I'm working on things on the mill. Automation, you can set one and go and work on the other. So that is really a cool thought, and I can't wait to get to that point. Now moving on to another topic right after this word from our sponsor.
Today's episode is sponsored by The Maker's Guide, creator of the Triple Edge Finder. Get the edge you need, save time and frustration on your CNC project, and make setup a snap. Save time and material. Set up your workpiece on your CNC router table faster than ever. Accurately set your Z-axis height first time, every time. Automatically locate the corner or edge of a workpiece. Reset your starting point in the middle of a program. Quality crafted right here in the USA on US-made CNC machines. Get the edge you need today. Go to www.themakersguide.com/edge. The Maker's Guide. Useful tools for makers.
Okay, welcome back. And now I'm going to talk about something that is important in all of our lives. We're doing CNC routers, tables, and some of us are doing things with our CNC router to form a business. And because of that, some of us are in the beginning stages where we just bought a router or we're thinking about buying one, and we're thinking about how to make money with it and how to set it up. And I thought that it might be a good service to talk to some professionals about starting small businesses. And so I'm putting together a series of interviews with folks, and I'm going to start out with the first one next week, which deals with insurance, business insurance. Now, I know you're wondering, well, what am I insuring? Why am I insuring a business before I even have one? And there are good reasons to do that. The whole purpose of insurance is to protect you from unforeseen events and to protect you from any liability that you may incur. And the time to think about that stuff is before you need it. So I asked a friend of mine, Bill Basher, to come on the show and talk about business insurance and why you need it, when you need it, what things will set off your homeowner's insurance company from looking at you and saying, hey, you guys are operating a business, we're not going to cover you. So there are certain things that happen, like for instance, when you put up signage and things like that, that you need to know about and to think about before you go into business. And so we'll be talking about business insurance. I'm also going to have another person on to talk about leasing, and other finance methods to finance purchases, and a few other folks. So if that sort of show interests you, then I think you'll be able to learn something from the next few episodes, and I hope that you will tune into them. But let me know, give me feedback if these are the kinds of shows that you would like to see and would like to hear, and we'll go from there. But we're going to get started anyway, and I really look forward to your feedback. If you have questions for the show, please go to cncroutertips.com/askme and leave us a message on what your questions are, because we'd love to answer them on the air. And if you do, you'll get a chance to win a free prize. Now, some of you recently have received your prizes, and so you know that it's pretty nice. So I hope you'll take a chance to do that. So I'm going to leave this episode short and let you get back to your projects, but I would love to hear what you're doing. If you'd like to join our private Facebook group, you can go to facebook.com/groups/CNC router tips and join that. There's going to be a link in the show notes for this episode. And for those of you who don't know what show notes are, they are just basically a blog post that lists all of the products and services and topics that we listed in this show and how to contact people that we talked to or talked about. So, go to CNC Router Tips and you can check out the blog, which has each episode there, usually by the episode number. So if this is episode 46, then you would go to cncroutertips.com/46. If it were episode 3, you would go to cncroutertips.com/3. And that would take you to the show notes for that episode. I often mention many different types of software during the episodes and hardware and cutters, and it can get a little confusing. So what I did was I put together a page on my website, cncroutertips.com/resources. And on that page, I list all sorts of resources there, from books to tools to software, all the things that I use that make my CNC experience better and easier. And I hope you'll check it out. So again, it's cncroutertips.com/resources. Now, if you'd like to have your question featured on the air, here's how. Need help? Ask me about your CNC router question on my podcast, the CNC Router Tips Podcast. I'll be glad to help or try and get you the help you need. I want this podcast to be a fun and personal experience for everyone and helpful. So let's keep it real and ask sensible questions. Please use common sense and show courtesy to everyone. That way everybody wins. Here are some guidelines to ensure that your question is qualified to be featured on the show. Please keep your questions under 1 minute in length. If it goes a little over that, that's fine, but don't ramble. If you have a website and URL, you're allowed to share it, but only once during the recording. Spammy or disrespectful or deeply private questions will not be considered for the podcast. If you need to ask more than one question, just make each question a separate voicemail. Okay, fantastic talking to you again. I'm Bill Griggs for CNC Router Tips. I hope you have a great day.